Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Wolfram Language Design Review, part of our Language Completeness and Consistency series. So it looks like we have a super simple agenda today. What's that?
I was just saying ha 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 ha.
Right. Let's try and tackle this one first, because I think it might be quick.
Right. So, there's this extra space at the bottom of a data set.
Which was annoying me when I was trying to put the data set in a notebook and so on.
Right. And the reason it's there is, there's this hover which gives you the keys, right? So if you hover over the mass of Demos, then you will see that drop down there, right? So that's all Mars.
I know.
Et cetera, et cetera. Now we
kind of annoying to have to leave that space for this. What about this area up here? No, that's not necessarily unused.
Exactly.
So wait, hold on. What's the problem with leaving that space? I mean, it seems like I think
when you put these things in a column, or when I had them in a notebook where you have text above and below them, it's annoyingly,
Well, I would argue that putting them in a column, you should not, data sets are not designed to be in columns. I think data sets are designed to be kind of on their own in a cell.
Yeah, but even when they're on their own in a cell, the cell below them is further away than the cell above them.
Right. So, at one point, I'm not sure we ever put this in a shipping version, but certainly at one point, we had this dotted frame around the whole data set, and then it was very clear what was there.
That was even more bizarre. Because it had that big empty space at the bottom.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I suppose the
we have anybody from graphic design here?
No, but I can ask.
So I don't recall having been involved in discussions about this, but there are definitely other forms of notifications that could happen. I mean, it could go in the status bar for the notebook. It could go in an attached cell that floats over other content.
Right, and I do mention that, right? We cannot reserve the space. Of course, then it might crash into whatever is beneath it, which maybe we don't care because it'll disappear as soon as you move the mouse, and we just give it a white background or something, right? We give it an appropriate background,
I think having it overlay what's below it is a perfectly good idea.
I mean, it's not unlike what we do with with like image cells, for example, where in that case it's a click, not a hover, but we're okay with the click producing a tool which can overlap content below it.
How do I make an image of a certain size?
1 comma.
And well, it's 1 comma dimensions.
Yeah, 1 comma dimensions. And so now if you click the image, see that's allowed to overlap, and that's okay.
That's just fine. I don't see a problem with that. I mean, sometimes it annoys me, but I know how to get out of it. I think that's what we should do for dataset. Go there, and it extrudes a thing that sort of floats over what the content below. I'm okay with that.
What sort of stuff is getting put in that space at the bottom?
It's the key that gives you that element, right? So float over the massive Phobos, or Deimos, whichever, right? So that's right. It's giving you Mars, Moons, Phobos. If you click over the mass, it gives you mass, and you'll see that input right below it. I have data set of Mars, Moons, Phobos, mass, and it So it's giving you the parts that will allow you to extract that thing programmatically. Which I get, right? I mean, that's useful, especially, right? Like if you scroll down and, click on the moons of Jupiter, so you'll actually be in a nested thing, right? It is sort of useful, right? So if you click on the more or wherever there is, the number, the 62 total.
Yeah, that's useful. That's useful to be able to see that breadcrumb. Quite why it has a space before Jupiter, I don't know.
Oh,
So this is another argument for it being an overlay, is that what if this thing is too narrow for the path?
Yes.
yeah, and in fact, it's it's the size is actively changing. I would rather the size didn't
Oh
change.
God, look at that. That's
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah.
All right. I think
Yeah,
we
no,
should make-
I was just wondering, if you want something that's at the bottom, or if you want something that's closer to the element that you're inspecting.
Well, the problem is most of what you can do interactively is with a right click. So if you had a tooltip or something, that would be, I know, I guess you could have it click through but it would be a little weird, I think. Maybe not. Jose, you're our biggest user of data sets here. Do you have an opinion on that point?
Not really. No.
I think we should just do the extrusion overlay thing.
Okay, okay. Before we go on to echo functions, I did have a question, which is, so go back to, so like click on moons there. Right, and so, right, I created this with max items goes to 4. So we only saw 4 planets at a time. But now that I clicked on it, I expected to see 4 moons with a scroll bar, but instead I see.
This is wrong.
Okay.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, if you said max items, it's because you want to see that number of items.
Yeah. Does anybody disagree or have a different take? I mean, I just wanted to make sure that this isn't some quote unquote feature that I don't understand because I'm not a heavy data set user, but I found this very surprising.
Seems surprising to me.
Okay.
I got a comment here that we might have graphic design take another look at these icons. They just have an awful sense of exclusive orism.
Okay.
No, exclusive animalism.
That is
something
just
tells me that
You are,
yeah.
I think, quite unusual. Not necessarily in mistaking it for something else, but in mistaking it for exclusive or, you're quite unusual.
I've even got it
Also,
wrong.
I think that the one on the right would be the XOR. Would
Yeah, right, exactly.
But it's got the bar on the wrong side. But yeah, I wouldn't look at that icon and say, "Why is there an exclusive OR button on my data set?"
I mean, heck, I came through in computer engineering, and I'm thinking, is he mistaking it maybe for a cloud floating on top of a mountain?
Actually, it'd be nice to pick up the motif of these rows here and have something where this is overlaid on top of a bunch of sort of rows. I think that might make it clearer what's going on here.
Overlaid over a bunch of rows. I didn't quite follow that.
Well, so what I mean is you have an arrow up, but it is somehow, the background is somehow this thing that shows that it is going up by rows somehow. Just a suggestion for design. Okay, I want to raise another thing, which I'm sorry we haven't got on the agenda today. And that is my graphics padding summit. Brett, let me clarify. You know what I mean by the graphics padding summit.
I know parts of it at least, but
and we've had versions of it. So, but I wasn't, and we made some decisions, but I wasn't aware that there were new issues to be.
I think the last I heard, you were interested in every possible source of padding. That goes into graphics and that sort of thing. Excuse me.
I'm interested in padding theorems, so to speak. In other words, if you combine this with that, there will be no space. There'll always be a fixed space. What will there be? See what I'm saying? Which I think right now is a mess. And I think it's a mess because the theorem, the theorem might include, oh, you can have a font there and it will do this, and so on and so on and so on. But we just need this very precise way of talking about all these things. That makes sense? Because we have these things where there's an amount of padding that's left because, oh, there might be a font on this side. We don't know how big it is. It's rendered at it's determined at rendering time, blah, blah, blah. And this is relevant because with native graphics coming to the cloud, there's yet another redo of all these kinds of things, and they're copying every design featurette.
Indeed.
Right? I think the case where I get most annoyed is in graphics grids where things are just like ridiculous amounts of space are getting left. And I don't know why. I mean, if I make a something like this, okay, so I say graphics, a rectangle, and then I say image size, arrow, random, real, let's say,
That's okay.
Okay, now, okay, so I don't even understand. What the hell's that? Oh, that's because it's a rectangle of that shape. Okay, so that's padded.
You need to add frames to these. It's impossible to tell whether they're reasonable without them.
Okay.
Right, because you're not changing the aspect ratio, right? So if you did aspect ratio goes to automatic, then it would be tight around the rectangle, but then they'd all be identical, I suppose.
No, I think you need background.
You maybe need to say framed around the outside. I don't think that frame is going where you think it is.
Yeah, I agree.
Change the frame to background light blue.
Okay. All right, now let me put these in a graphics grid.
Well, but okay. I mean, are there any of these that you're complaining about?
The initial ones.
Whatever the background went.
Yeah, that was going to be my question.
That's really weird.
That is weird.
Oh, but I see a background. I see blue right around here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just a hint of blue.
So something goofed up here, but also, I mean, this just isn't right. Look at this. I mean, if I say,
but they're right. They're all the same. Right, they're all the same size, right?
Where did the blues come from just now?
Well, he's using grid rather than graphics grid.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right.
Gotcha.
So I mean, right, if you hop away the background, which is going around, right, the spacings are basically the same between those two. Maybe it's a bit smaller in the grid. So
yeah,
maybe,
why has it got extra stuff in the graphics grid?
Well, there isn't. It's just that.
Well, there is a little bit, right? I mean, if we measure the number of pixels between, the bottom left square and the square right above it, then.
But Stephen also resized the graphic.
Oh, he did, didn't he?
Yeah.
Okay, so well, what the hell's going on here? Why does?
Wait, some of the plot ranges are changing too, and you rescale it. Like if you rescale it, look at the very first one, top left. You can see the blue region changes size.
Oh gosh.
Well, I think that's just aspect ratio, right? It has an aspect ratio, and then so the blue is, it's preserving.
It's getting trimmed.
Right.
Well, it's getting trimmed down, and look, in the theorem, so to speak, the frame is gone. So our, open interval, closed interval, something went wrong and the frame is gone now. right? Which is wrong, right? We agree it's wrong that the frame disappears in this case, right?
Yes.
Okay, so somewhere something, so what happened that caused that to occur? I mean, this is why I want
Well, I
my.
mean,
this
as
is
soon as you start having
pattern
stuff
thing.
outside of graphics,
Yeah, this
Who
is a
knows?
very difficult case to reason about. It's the
Sorry.
wrapping of the frame around it that makes it very hard to reason about.
But it still should work. I mean, give me a reason why it shouldn't work.
So, I mean, it's like you did graphics grid of a table of strings.
Yes. And why wouldn't that work?
what does it mean?
Yeah, what does it mean, right? We have to make a choice of how to convert those strings into graphics and blah, blah, blah.
And oftentimes, and
Right.
strings have absolute sizing components.
Sure. Well,
Right,
let's try.
right. The output of a graphics grid is a grid.
No.
Sorry, is a graphics. Is what I was actually trying to say, not a grid, which means, right, these things that strings don't naturally live. I mean, I suppose you can wrap them in text and give them coordinates and then they naturally live in graphics, but they don't in and of themselves naturally live inside of graphics expression. So choices have to be made about how to embed them.
And
Okay.
in our graphics, by default, even when they are in graphics expressions, they're sized absolutely. Unless you do something to change that.
Okay, so now what are we seeing here? So yeah, so
And they're in
sized
traditional
absolutely.
forms, so the single ones are italicized.
Oh, gosh. Okay. But so now
I
what
mean,
are we seeing?
and so what you have done by wrapping framed around the individual graphics
okay, so
is
are
you
we
have
upset about what?
inadvertently created some overlap with this example.
Okay, so wait a second. So what happened here? Why did that funk out? Oh, because it's a line wrap.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's right. It's forcing a size. So
Yeah, it made some choice about how wide it thinks they're gonna be, and then you made them smaller. So
Oh,
something
why
gave.
did this not resize the grid to be able to fit it?
What does
do you
that
mean?
even mean? It's absolutely sized text. You didn't do
Yes.
anything to change
Oh, I
that.
see. So if I make the grid absolutely smaller, I'm toast. Yeah. Okay. But so explain to me again, why is this getting cut off? Do you know? I mean,
I mean, what I'm saying is it's actually pretty hard to reason about.
right. So it's hard to give a definitive answer.
Short answer: it's getting cut off because it's going outside the edges of the inset that was constructed for it.
yes.
Why exactly? I don't know.
Okay, but do you think that's a bug?
But
I think that's a bug.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I mean, because there is a frame box sitting in between there.
Look,
it's not a pure graphic anymore.
Experientially, it's a bug.
It's of the same order of thing as if you did square root of the graphic or x plus the graphic or something like that. If it were a pure graphic, there would be more consistent levers that we could control. But when you throw it into the 2D typesetting world, 2D typesetting does not want to be resized in that way.
Right. It's like right. I mean, if you use the frame option, which obviously will behave very differently, that's something that lives inside of the graphics, which is different from framed of graphic, which puts a thing around the whole graphics.
Why didn't this do what I expected it to do?
Well, that.
Is square root defined for image?
So. It might be applying it to the elements, and the elements are all, but they're not all zeros or ones. Right. We do have such a thing as image arithmetic.
Yeah, we do.
So I presume it's applying now. What I can't tell you. I mean, I can understand why zeros are right. If you only had white and black,
Yeah,
would,
yeah. Then it would. Just
oh,
be
well, it might be that these are RGB, all in RGB, and they're all zeros and ones.
Right. I think that's right. I think that's the problem.
Yeah.
Amusing. How do I get a function which doesn't map?
Yeah,
zeros
well,
and
you know,
ones?
add a half to it, right? That should work.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Cool. Okay. In any case, back to this. I'm still coming back to experientially, this is a bug.
Right. I mean, so what happens is, when you evaluate graphics grid, it, especially in this case where you have framed of graphics, it measures in some sense what the size of that is. And then I think this was the one that you resized, right?
I'm sure I resized.
That caused the clipping.
Well, let's see it at a, okay. Let's see what happens if I give it an absolute image size.
Now, what exactly are you claiming is the bug?
This is missing here.
Okay. Which may be.
Does that have a half of a frame edge on the right?
Right. That also could possibly be an aliasing issue, right? That you ended up with half of.
I mean, the fact that all the clippings are right on the frame edge suggests to me that there could be a second issue at play here, which is not interesting for purposes of this discussion.
But you think it's just a bug? Because I don't think it's necessarily a bug.
Possibly.
I think it's a complicated question. I think that's why we need theorems about padding. Because I think it's a question of, an open interval, a closed interval. Do you include the boundary? Those kinds of things.
Well, I mean, this is the kind of thing that we have to deal with all the time. In the front end, we deal with this kind of stuff all the time. It's part of our bread and butter. But we have a history of in some cases doing some arithmetical rounding to get things to line up on the pixel grid, and that was a great thing to do when everybody's monitors looked the same in the 90s and the aughts. But now we no longer have a reliable pixel grid that we can snap to, and it's we can't even assume that a pixel grid on the same machine is consistent. It might be different from monitor to monitor. Yeah. And so
yes, all three of my monitors are quite different in that respect.
Yeah, so we're actually in the process of extricating ourselves from that mess that we spent decades getting into.
Okay, so do you think this will? I mean, this is a bug, so we got to figure out.
Right. So if what we're seeing here is just of the nature of it just trimmed the very edges and that's it, then I think it might be that kind of bug.
Okay,
but but the bigger issue you were raising is you resize and it does kind of really fundamentally different things. That's the different question, which is interesting.
Okay, but I also have another point. There's too much space here. Why is there so much space here and not so much space here?
I think I think because all the squares are sized the same, and so because that row only has not very tall things in it, you don't.
But that's not how grid works. Grid doesn't do that.
No, but if nothing else, just look at the widest element in each column, and the tallest element in each row, and every element in each row and column has to, be at least that big.
I know, but there's no descender here that goes into the white space. There's a big gutter here with no descender going into it. Why is there such a gutter?
Right. I mean, I think the literal reason is that all the rows are the same height. That's one of the differences between graphics grid and normal grid, isn't it?
I don't know. It's not supposed to be.
Brett? I mean, that's how I've been interpreting what I see, but I assumed that was intended.
I don't remember off the top of my head, and
all right. Well,
because there's and I would claim that right. If you look at a grid of, at like a gallery icon or a gallery icon, an icon gallery or any sort of image gallery, typically it's certainly very common, and I would claim the usual case is that all the rows and columns are the same height and width, and the icon takes up however much space in that it wants. Right. So if I presume you can do like dividers goes to all in graphics grid, is that something you can?
Yes.
Yeah, you can.
Right. And then we would see that, we have exactly the same behavior of a standard image gallery where they're all the same height.
No, they're not. Well, look at these. Some of these lines are thicker than others, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I don't.
They're not drawn that way. So, I mean, if they're rendering that way, that's.
It could be aliasing.
There is some confusing stuff though, because like look at the first top left two. Why are they not taller? Oh,
that's what I'm wondering right now. Is
why?
Okay, so I just came across something interesting. Let me throw a couple of examples in chat for you to evaluate. Oh, sorry. No, not that. There. So that, and then compare to the same thing with dividers all. Now, just copy down, but add dividers all to the graphics grid. There's an interesting difference here, which I had not at all expected.
Weird. Right, it's leaving space above the top row things. Brett, I think they're just bugs here. I'm telling you, we need theorems.
I agree there are bugs, and I've halfway tracked down some for graphics row, a bit ago, and haven't been able to, haven't come back around to pick it up again. But
all right,
I will. Yes, I will. I mean, I will also submit the thought that the theorems you are searching for may, we might take us 350 pages to prove that 1 + 1 = 2. Right. I mean, they're
explain. What do you mean? I mean, the theorem I'm looking for is a statement that, for example,
right.
There will never be more space left than needs to be left in this situation. There will always be enough space to render the boundary. Those kinds of things.
And my assertion that defining in this situation may take you as long, what could potentially take us as long as it took Hilbert to prove that 1 + 1 = 2.
I think not Hilbert. That was a
yes, not Hilbert.
Whitehead and
Russell. Yes, I meant Russell.
That was just them showing off. But anyway, never mind that. Okay. Well,
yeah.
You might be right.
My experience with that is that you're going to spend a lot of time on those last pixels, getting those right.
Right.
Well, okay, but I mean, we got to have some axiomatic claims. Like, for example, probably this violates an axiomatic claim. Like adding dividers shouldn't change the, the range of the graphic. Adding a frame.
Are you saying that?
Right. So we're saying those two inputs are the same except for the dividers goes to all is what you're telling us, and we're getting very different. Yes, I think we can all agree that's a bug.
Probably.
I know maybe Brett will disagree with me, but
I mean, I can't promise, but I have a strong feeling that I was told that spacing above the element depends on that top frame edge. So the question is, which one is the bug? If the claim is that it's a bug.
Well, the
Right.
other question is, why is there so
And-
much space around these things to begin with? Why are they not further down here?
That I'm not sure about. I mean, I think that comes back to, for whatever reason, graphics grid is making all the things the same height.
I don't think it is. I don't think that's generally true.
Well, it's been true in every
what's the
example we've
default-
seen.
What's the default alignment option?
Center.
Center. Okay. In which case, I feel like that's a bug. That the top one is a bug. If the default alignment is center and not something like automatic or whatever, then I don't see how you can reasonably claim that that top square and circle are center. I mean, what are they center? Right,
I
both
mean,
of those things can't be centered, is my claim. Both of those rows can't be centered. So if the default alignment is centered, then that is a bug, is my claim.
Right.
But I will also claim, right, I mean, if we think about all the different things that we're sticking into these graphics grids, right, there's image margins, padding, frame margins, shrink wrap goes to true or false. There are probably 17 different options. And I'm not even sure that that's an exaggeration, that are all potentially interacting with each other here. And so proving a theorem when you have those many options is going to be quite difficult.
Okay, but the question of what, there's no equal, in the case of grid, there's an option called equal elements or something. What's it called?
Equal. I have no idea what you're talking about, to be honest.
I do, but I'm just not remembering.
There used to be a columns equal and rows equal. It is now instead a setting for item size.
Yeah, but I can't remember what the setting is.
It's documented.
All.
Okay. Well, so is there a corresponding thing for graphics?
I don't
grid?
think there is for graphics grid. Maybe
There's
that
item
will
size.
help.
Wait a minute. There's no item size. All right. Anyway, I'm telling you, there's some things wrong here, and we can.
I'm
can
not
look at them.
disputing that.
Okay.
He's
All
saying
right,
he doesn't want to work on it because it's really painful.
I know. So I
Well,
think
no. Well, okay, and now you're going to run out of time for all the good echo stuff. But anyway,
let's go back to good echo. Okay, let's turn to echo. What was
All
the
right.
myth of echo? Echo was some character in Greek mythology. I don't remember.
Yes.
oh, I thought you meant like a glyph character. Like,
Wasn't it Echo and
No.
Narcissus or something?
Could be.
Right. So, we propose, at some meeting, which may well be like 4 months ago now, given the number of times this agenda item has been delayed. Right. We provisionally came up. Right. Well, but we're not going to skip straight ahead to the goals this time. We're going to actually go into thinking about some of the details. Right. So we came up with, a bunch of these things, which I think is probably a few too many, but also we should think through about what it is we actually want out of some of these. So for example, echo limit was a request from Christopher, which was to have something like dollar output size limit for echo.
Yes.
And I mean, my first claim is that this has to be called echo size limit or nobody will understand what it is.
I agree.
And then there's a conceptual question of should just this be the same output size limit, but there's also a sort of a deeper philosophical issue, is that output size limit works inherently by the fact that everything is assigned to out, right? If you have right, if dollar history length is 0, output size, I mean, I suppose the output size limiter will fire and you'll see a short thing, but you'll never be able to do anything with it. Is that correct, Lou? I guess I should have tried that before this meeting.
That's what should happen. Yes.
Right. And so all this functionality depends on the fact that it can all the nice things other than the fact that it's short depend on the fact that that expression is still stored somewhere, namely in out.
I understand.
And so then the question is, what do we do for echo? And we have sort of a similar issue with just print. And, maybe we say print is low level and we don't care about it, but echo, I feel like,
Okay, so I've got a suggestion. Okay. In the output size limiter, there is an interactive way to get everything. You're saying it's very nice that you don't need the interactive way to get everything because you still bound it to something. But echo.
No.
It's more than that. It couldn't actually be implemented to get everything if it weren't there in the down value of out.
I got it. But I mean, so my claim is, okay, so your point is that when echo comes out, it's transmitting in the blind, so to speak, and it doesn't have any, there's nothing, there's no thing there. It's just splitting out this message and forgetting it.
It's ephemeral. Yeah.
Yep. It's no different than if you did, cell print of, 5 or expression cell of 5, right? That creates a cell that has 5, but the 5 isn't stored anywhere, that the kernel
right,
does.
Exactly. Yeah. What's an analogy to this? I mean, it's clearly useful to have an echo size limit. What is the print? What is the analogous thing for printing? What is it called? What is the limiter called? What's the thing that determines the default limit?
There is no analogous thing for printing.
You mean $message preprint or?
No. I mean the thing. What determines when you get a too big thing in printing? In just regular.
Or you mean an output?
An output.
Right. So there's a hook in $preprint that checks if the if the expression is big, which is also a very complicated and something we could spend we could have a whole summit about the definition of big there. But
okay, fine.
If it determines that it's too big, rather than allowing it to just format normally, it formats this output size limiter, which shows you sort of the short version of it with all the extra buttons to.
Okay, I get it, but there's no $output size limit option that you can set.
Well, there is. It's called $output size limit.
Oh.
And it, you can set it in the front end preferences even.
Okay, so $echo size limit would refer to the same thing, the maximum size in bytes, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But the thing that you're commenting on is that in an output size limit, the stuff is still there. Is this a modern output size limit?
No.
Is this sort of regenerated?
That's something that should be regenerated. And yeah, it's probably not long enough. Oh yeah, that shortened output size limiter in the previous input, if you look at it, right? So you.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Oh, for God's sake. Well, I'm sure I can get it to limit at some point.
Right. I mean,
why isn't that limiting?
That's
Baboom limited.
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, that's a thing to feed to Brian and the documentation team. The fact that wasn't caught as a thing that had to be regenerated.
Yep, got it.
Okay. So the question is, if we do the corresponding thing for echo, we could have some kind of, this has been shortened type indicator, but we can't have a show more.
Correct.
Well, I still think it's worthwhile.
It's very similar to what we're doing with error handling right now. I mean, or message handling, I should be more specific.
Right. The message just doesn't come out if it's more than the third message.
And if you were hoping to see the messages beyond that, you literally have no choice but to reevaluate the input.
Yeah. Fine. So $echo size limit seems like it's quite sensible, and it should be set to. And the only thing is the visual question of what it looks like.
And does it also apply? Does it apply to the sum of the bytes of the label and the thing that was printed?
Oh God, I don't know. I would say just the thing that's printed.
Yeah, I mean that's my instinct as well. For one thing, A, labels are expected to be small. B, you have full control over that. So,
okay, what should it do? What should it look like? Should it do this lozengey type thing, or what should it do?
I'm not sure we have something much better than that.
Well, fine, but we might as well use something that's consistent with this. We'll need a lightweight version of these things without the footer.
Right.
Okay. All right, let's move on here. Okay, we got that.
Yep.
Echo temporary and limit echo.
Right. And, I mean, we would need to do some implementation work, but I think rather than having, a limit echo and the $ max echo limit and all that, right? We already have echo quiet.
Quiet
so if
echo.
A quiet echo, yes. So if we implemented hold all subvalues, which is something we've talked about wanting, we could just turn quiet echo into an operator form, and with, like I show in that input there. And I think that's probably a better direction than adding several similarly named symbols that are slightly different.
I think let's just see whether we can reduce the number of symbols that we care about to a small number.
Okay.
Okay.
So what are the, okay, so how do you want to go about thinking about that?
Well, I think what's important is this concept here. I think that's more important than this concept here. But it's a little annoying that you would have to say, see what I'm saying? I mean, this is, when you're putting in the echo, you're thinking, oh, I want to show this while it's evaluating, and then I want it to go away.
In fact, what is the difference between, now that I'm looking at this again, what's the difference between echo temporary and cleanup echo?
Okay, echo temporary means this echo that I am generating right here will be a limited
actually
time.
Is an echo, but it's a temporary one.
Right. Whereas cleanup echo is there will be echoes made here, but when this is finished evaluating, get rid of them.
Right. Yes. Now I remember. And remember, I prepared this agenda item and I still got it confused, which is why I'm saying there are too many symbols.
So for cleanup echo, would that clean up echoes that were pre-existing the call into cleanup echo, or just echoes generated within the cleanup echo?
Inside the cleanup echo.
Right. So somehow it would have, the guys that are inside the ones that come from Expert will need to somehow tag themselves as we came from Expert, so that when cleanup echo runs,
cleanup echo could simply do a lexical replacement of every echo is replaced by.
I think cleanup echo should just block some variable that then each echo function.
Yeah, I guess I didn't mean that literally. I wasn't trying to get into there. Right, we can all think of at least 4 different possible implementations, which I don't think is the important point. The point I was trying to stress is that yes, the cleanup echo specifically looks for the echoes that are associated with the expression inside of it. So you could,
Okay,
conceivably.
let's talk use cases. Okay, echo temporary I see as being something that I would routinely put into code just as an El Cheapo progress monitor.
Mm-hmm. Right, and by necessity, it would sort of have to, apply to an entire shift enter evaluation.
Yes. Well, maybe.
Right. I mean that is a question, right? Right. Presumably, echo temporary removes things when when the current line is finished. When the current shift
Although
enter
it could be
finished.
made, it could have an option for, allowed echoes type option where echo temporary just looks at the echoes in sequence and starts removing them, keeps only the most recent n echoes. So that it really looks as like a progress monitor, but maybe that's better to be done with a panel. Maybe it's better to be done by something that looks like our progress framework. I mean, okay, how do you get, you're writing a function and you want a progress dialog.
Well, I mean, nothing like that can be done with just echo, right? I mean, you will have to and I mean, that's true for our progress monitors, and that will be true for your quick and dirty progress monitor. You will need to have a variable that tracks the state, and your progress monitor, however you implement it, will need to, spit out values from that monitored variable or variables.
Well, except that I'd really love to have a monitor for map, for example, even though I don't have a, I think we talked about this before, having a version of monitor which has one argument.
Yes. And we, was there, and we have a branch that does it possibly in the prototype build, and I'm trying to remember why it's not finished. Lou, was there some there was some problem around message, what happens with bad arguments.
That's the one that I remember Julio, was it Julio or Carlo?
It was Julio
mentioning, yeah.
Well, maybe we can look at that again. Can we look at that again? Because it seems like a very worthwhile thing to have. All right, let's just.
Right, but I will point out that, that doesn't just magically work, right? Monitor needs to be given the knowledge to recognize, oh, this is map, so let me track this thing, which is why I'm saying echo is not a progress monitor, right? It will need to echo, it can potentially echo things that are monitoring progress, but in and of itself, it is not a progress monitor.
I realize that. Okay, fair enough. So the only question is, when it echoes, so let's think about what happens. Usually echo is just extruding stuff up on the screen, right?
Yep.
So one thing we might want to do is to panelize that stuff. That is, for example, that echo is producing something that is kind of like a limited size scroll on the screen.
Yep, I believe that was the thing of the idea of the horribly named panel echo.
Right, but an alternative to that would be that there is an echo temporary, that you call it echo temporary, but it has a second argument, which is the number of echoes or something. That's not quite the right thing. No, that's not the right thing, because it has to be global. Well, okay. That's not quite the right thing. Something has to be able to
right. I mean, that could be like a second argument to clean up echo, exactly. Right? That running max goes to 10 or something, right? It'll clean up everything at the end, but by default, it'll show everything and then clean everything up at the end. But you could say, running maximum is 10. And
yeah, I like that. I like that. That seems sensible to me. And that gets rid of the need for the panel echo thing.
Mm-hmm.
So then we have the notion of echo temporary. Well, the question is, do we need echo?
Get rid of the need for limit echo? and $max echo limit if it's just the second argument to clean up echo?
What's limit echo?
It's supposed to be,
Yeah,
basically
it
turn
would
on
get-
quiet echo after a certain number.
I mean, I think that there's a
Sometimes
small
it's
corner
make
case,
quiet echo.
which is limit echo would work like messages do, where that particular message gets 3 strikes and it's out. You see what I'm saying? Whereas cleanup echo by default would not distinguish different echo sources. So it will just clean up, let's say you give it a depth of 5, whatever those echoes are, it'll only have 5 total echoes. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm not sure that distinction is important.
Well, that's certainly not what that putative documentation says, right? It says limit echo will evaluate expert without letting echo and related functions print more than max number of times.
Yeah, okay, so it's wrong. But I mean, but you understand what I'm saying. You could limit it by this particular piece of code can only generate some number as this piece of code is in a loop, this particular echo can only appear more than n times, less than n times.
Right. So okay. So you want something that basically it rather than limiting the number that are kept, it just stops echoing after.
Yeah, this particular echo becomes impotent, so to speak, after that number of echoes.
Right. Which.
And this would need to be lexical, right? The echo needs to literally appear as a sub-expression of the expert.
I mean,
right. I don't know, but I mean, this could certainly go into echo temporary. This concept of a maximum number, if anybody cares about it, of a maximum number per echo. Actually,
or it could go into quiet echo, right? Well, once we either as another option to quiet echo, which we, right? Yeah. Even if we don't,
I think this is I don't know. Does anybody else have an opinion? Like Christopher, do you have an opinion about this? Is this a corner case or is this a case one cares about? I think it might be a case one cares about because it might be. I don't know. It's a corner case. I mean, so you say I want 10 deep echo stack, so to speak. And then you say, oh my gosh, I missed all the ones like that. I mean, the mechanism that we've had for the last 35 years for messages is reasonably sensible, I think. 3 instances of one message, and then you see if there's something very different happening. You see what I'm saying?
Notice though that's not 3 instances of the same message call.
I see. It's 3 instances of the same named message, although its source might have been lexically different.
Right.
Which I believe somebody suggested using the label, the optional label for echo as that, like basically like a message tag.
One could. I don't know.
In general, I kind of think that echoes are not meant for, I don't know. I would kind of argue that echoes are less meant for building up giant systems and more just for I'm debugging this or I need to add some logging here or something like that.
Exactly.
And
but
so,
we don't. But the frustrating thing is when there is something absolutely irrelevant, you put an echo in a loop and it's scrolling off the screen with CRUD. But then every so often there's an echo you really care about and you lose it because the irrelevant inner loop echo is drowning everything.
Right, but you will, right? I mean, that'll happen no matter which way you limit it. That's going to happen.
No,
right?
it isn't. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. If you limit by echo instance, then the inner loop echo can be limited to 5 things, and then it limits out. And then you see the thing that is important coming up later.
Yeah, but at that point, my claim is at that point, that's more trouble than it's worth. You'll run it once, you'll see that it gets drowned out. You'll remove the thing that's drowning out in favor of the thing that you actually care about. And then
possibly.
So yeah, I mean, I don't. I think we should focus on on things that we're reasonably convinced we need. So I think we're reasonably convinced that we want an $echo size limit.
Yeah,
you know.
we're convinced that we want an echo temporary because that's just annoying to see the echo, because that way you can have that in a notebook. I've routinely, like when I run a notebook overnight, for example, okay, and I put an echo in there just so I can, so I can see roughly what's happening, right? And then I let it run for another 5 hours. And the thing is just like gobs and gobs of pages of echoes, which I really just don't want. Once it's finished, I just want them all cleaned up.
Right.
Now, the only difference between echo temporary and cleanup echo is that I like to be able to have something where I can just, at the point where I'm adding it to the code, say it's a temporary echo, rather than having to wrap cleanup echo around the whole thing.
You could do cleanup echo around an entire input line, and it would effectively replace all of the echoes with echo temporary.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's useful to have the echo temporary to begin with.
I guess I'm going to disagree with that, because how often will you want both echoes and echo temporaries? And
almost never.
Right. In which case, why not just have a / cleanup echo at the end, and then all of your, you can use all of the 4 types of echoes that we have.
That's not unreasonable. I don't disagree with that.
By the way, just as a provisional workaround, and maybe you're already doing this, but I'll remind you that you can option click an echo cell, and that will select all the echo cells in the notebook.
No, I didn't think of that. I never remember that. We've had that feature for 35 years, and I never remember it.
It's helpful.
Does anybody else know that? Anybody else know that trick?
I know that.
I didn't.
I use it daily.
On echoes?
I'm not sure how many people use it on echoes, but I just checked, and it works fine on, at least on the standard echo outputs. I don't know if there are exotic echo cells.
No, I don't think so. I think that they will.
Yeah, there's echo timing and there's echo evaluation, have different kinds of echo cells.
Yeah, but by the way, the fact that there are those different species of echo is a great reason why echo temporary is a bad idea. So, all right, so maybe it's cleanup echo, although I'm not so keen on the name. And that's the one function we keep from this whole collection.
Yeah.
And
okay, yeah, so $echo size limit and cleanup echo, or echo cleanup, is that better? I'm not sure.
Cleanup is not better.
Yeah, as soon as I said it out loud, I realized.
What is with cleanup? How analogous is this to with cleanup?
Marginally.
Yeah, marginally, right? With cleanup.
Can we think of another word than cleanup? I mean, it really is basically just deleting echoes at the end.
Right. It's temporarize echo.
It could just be remove echo, because it's running at the end.
What would be the function for this? Like notebook delete, to delete a cell?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Right. And yeah, I mean, I started to raise this question before. Does it do the cleanup when the cleanup echo, or whatever we call it, the remove cleanup, when it returns, or when the shift enter evaluation returns? Because
I think it's when it returns. I think it's much more useful. It's when it returns, because you could have multiple blocks of stuff.
Okay.
And do this in between. But let's think about this name for a second, okay?
Okay.
Let's see. I'm looking at thesaurus here. Purge echo. I mean, unfortunately, we don't really have a concept. I mean, notebook delete is obviously the same kind of concept. But this idea,
I think
yeah,
I think the problem is that cleanup like that is a noun, right? I mean, if we really want it to be a verb, that it should be a camel cased cleanup.
Yeah, and that's really ridiculously confusing. Let me see, what would it be like? Delete echo.
I think delete echo, remove echo.
Yeah.
I think that's more like delete, right? Because than remove. I mean, we typically use remove for, like we remove symbols, we remove
Look,
objects.
if we could get away with delete echoes, I think that would be somewhat clear.
Would that be confusing with quiet echo? Why isn't it quiet echoes?
Yeah. Okay, what's some other words for delete? I mean, it's
Trim, truncate.
Oh, I like trim.
yeah, trim echo.
Because what I was also
The
wondering
problem with
is,
trim echo singular is it's a bit confusing with. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
what I was going to say. So Itai was talking earlier about this having an option to, how many it keeps around. Then I'm, wondering, sort of how flexible is that bit of functionality? Does it have the ability to allow the first 3 echoes and then drop everything after, or as well as keep the last 3? While it's displaying.
Yeah, I think it probably does have.
And can it be something where there's some set, that it deletes, it allows things to build up while it's running, and then keeps the last 3 or something even after it's gone.
I was thinking the same thing. I think whatever, if this is an option for cleanup echo, we should have the same option for quiet echo, and that should be the thing that
Yes.
keeps them in the notebook.
Right, and quiet echo could not completely quiet it. It could be, quiet with some escapees. All right, let's think about this word. I mean, we got. Okay, what word indicates we're going to. How about this? How about erase echo? Seems better than any of the previous ones. It's somewhat clear that it's a different kind of action.
Is there any sound related word? Hash or something?
Well, we've already got quiet.
Mm-hmm.
What were you saying? Sorry, what were you saying, Jose?
I was trying to find other sound related, given that echo has this immediate
sound,
connection with sound.
Like mute.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, except mute would be better for quiet. I mean,
Yeah.
but it isn't really the same thing. It's after the fact. You see, it doesn't really a thing for sound, because in sound, I went yak, 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 but I can't unyak my yaks, so to speak. Once heard, it cannot be unheard. But once written, it could be erased. I like erase echo. What's that?
It's interesting that we have never used any form of erase in a system symbol before.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Well, why would we use erase and not delete?
Good question.
Because we don't want to sound like we're supporting Cybermen.
What?
The Cybermen.
I remember them from when they were first on television on Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Yes, and they're the verb.
No, I saw them when they actually were airing.
Yes. They like to delete their enemies.
Yeah, the new Doctor Who series, they've like Daleks, they now have a word they've latched onto, which is delete.
Oh, I don't know. They had that in 1965 or whatever.
They did not have it in the original series. That's new to the 2000 series.
I see. Well, delete echo is not obviously bad. I think we should go with that. Now let's talk options for a minute.
I was going to say, John, so we've never had erase, but we had clean slate, which...
When did we have clean slate?
I don't think that was never in the system context, though.
No, it was a package, that's, basically, reset your global state and everything. And
yeah, that went back to Babylonian times. Did they have slates in Babylonia? I don't know. They did. Did they have slates, or did they just have clay tablets? I don't know when slate was.
In Roman times, they liked their wax tablets.
Ah.
This isn't like block echo.
Interesting question. That's an interesting question. I don't think so. I think it's more, if it's any of those things, it's it's kind of like
block
dynamic
random.
module. What's that?
It's sort of like block random.
Yeah, but it's not block random in the sense that it's like a dynamic module where it returns, because it's a visible thing on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Is deleting really the only operation we want to support here? Might you want to copy all your echoes somewhere else as a cheap logging?
Let's talk about this.
Right. That is one of the things under goals of, do we want to redirect echoes?
Yes, let's talk about that, because that's another.
Or support like print action.
Well, we could call it control echo. Sounds a bit like quiet echo. But let's talk about what to do with the redirection. Because we do want to have some mechanism for just sending all the echoes somewhere. Where do we want to send them? To a file. That's the primary place. I was just nullify echo, which isn't used in.
I think it would probably be some subset of the things that are supported by print action.
What is supported by print action?
I'm not sure. It's like messages window, I think.
What the heck is it?
It's front end option. It's one that I haven't updated documentation for.
I need to look at something. I was doing a live stream and somebody asked when this was. Oh, I said 20 years and I'm wrong. It's only 13. Okay. Anyway. Okay. What do we really want this to do? Basically it's a logging function. And I'm not sure that we should have, the problem is we don't want all the echoes. We got so many different echoes. We might have a different function called log echo. I don't think it's quite the same thing. Cleaning it up and logging it. Unless you say it should, no, because we don't want to display first and only put it to the file later, if you get what I'm saying.
I think logging is something different. I don't think it should be tied up with echo.
Except that the actions that we have with echo, like echo evaluation and things like this, seem very useful for logging.
Can you look at the options for print action and the global preferences?
Which global preferences?
Option inspector, Command Shift O.
Where is the freaking option?
It's the format. It's right there, middle. Change the scope to global. And pop open the menu. But these are all very notebook oriented though.
I mean, to me, this is more like the deployment of a form notebook or something. Right, what could you do? Okay, what could you do with a log? You could log to a file. Okay, where can you log? You could log to local object. You could log to a data bin, maybe. You could log to a cloud object. You could log to a file.
You could just log to memory.
How do you retrieve it? All right, or you could log to a
Well, I
new
mean,
ID in memory.
it's you know, I mean, it's like a so reap sort of thing, right?
Well, why aren't you using so and reap? If you want to actually split out an expression, use so and reap.
Could be a time, right, and like going into some global association with timestamps as keys. That would be a way to
Yes.
To log to memory.
Could be pretty
Less
messy.
vulnerable to aborts compared to so and reap.
How dare you?
Yeah, so whoever was just speaking was
Sorry,
that
my
Danny
mic was down.
or Jeremy. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Or my mic was up. Sorry, I was saying that using an association is less vulnerable to aborts than using sow and reap.
That's a good point. All right, question. Okay. So I have to say that I think the Echo framework is a pretty reasonable framework for saying what you put in a log file, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, otherwise, how would we log evaluations, for example, or timings? Or would we have a, no, actually, there's another possibility. Like event handlers, we could have, or handler functions, we could have something which basically logs, there's all kinds of keys available for the logger. So, I mean, we could have a thing which says log evaluate or something. What's the right word? I mean, log obviously is taken. So the concept would be it's a logging of expa, comma, and then a bunch of keys. And then it logs those keys.
Sorry, I got disconnected.
Right, it logs those attributes. So it could be, for example, logging, you know, it could be timestamp, time, evaluation time. It could be input, held input or something. This is a better idea, by the way. Output, etc. Memory. Well, I mean, the other thing one could do is just log when it gives an arbitrary expression to specify what to log. So it could either be the now, you can log the now. It's not so easy to log the evaluation time because that requires something that sort of spans the expa. But I mean, then this would be, basically this would be some kind of default logging. Okay, what would one do here? What would one do? One log by session. One could log by session to a local object. One could log in a directory. I mean, that's what a lot of applications might do. Log into a directory with a UUID. Guys?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Where does it log by default? Do you have
Oh.
to specify the logging location every time? Or does it simply log, you know, is there a dollar logging location, which is simply set globally, where you expect that all logging in a session goes to the same place? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I mean, one
Mhm.
possibility, at least on, depending on the platform is, wherever the global system log is.
Yes.
Yeah, assuming there are user logs. Maybe there are user logs on all platforms now. I mean, right, it can't be the global system one because that won't normally be writable by the user.
Right.
Right. I mean, whichever one on Mac OS that I,
Yeah,
go
the one
and look
the
at,
one-
and it
right,
just
the
has
one-
random apps
Right,
logging you to it.
Yeah, the one that's in tilde, the one that's in tilde library logs rather than / library logs.
On the other hand, the question is, do we want a computable log? That would be more like a data bin. I mean, if it was a data bin, it would be a computable log. If it's just a piece of text, it's not a computable log in and of itself. Well, okay, let's
Right. I
come
mean,
back to,
I guess one, potential difference between Echo and logging is that, Echo, you're probably interested in the result of a computation, whereas logging, you're probably just as likely to be interested in what the input was.
sure. I know, that's why I think we need these keys.
Yeah.
Well, I think also, right, I mean, I feel like with Echo, right, Echo is typically not something you want to keep around, right? Whereas logging is probably maybe something you do want to keep around.
Yes. I mean, it's not totally obvious you don't want to keep Echo around. I've seen plenty of use cases where you do. Look, I think we should implement delete Echo with a second argument, which will also be its sub-value, also be its operator form, that is a count of some kind.
And what does a count on and that's the running total?
That's the number the number of survivors. So the default will be 0.
I see. Okay. Right. So then you say, right. So that allows you to see the last 5.
Which is an argument for calling it prune Echo. Maybe. How do people feel about prune versus delete?
I think I
It's a
prefer
little
delete.
bit. What's that?
I think I prefer delete.
Right, we can implement it as delete. Let's see what that feels like. So you'd say delete Echo of 5, and that would show you, that would leave as residue in the notebook the last 5 echoes. Right?
So were you thinking the second argument is
I think it should be delete Echo of expa, comma, n, or the sub-value would be delete Echo of n of expa.
okay. So that would require.
Does that, wait a minute, does that work, or is that impossible because of no held sub-values
Exactly. We need hold all sub values
to do the sub-value case?
Yeah.
So, what we can implement immediately is delete echo of
And
expr.
also, I think it might be nicer to have delete echo of expr. One argument, just have a reasonable.
No, I think it should delete everything. I think it should get rid of everything.
Mm-hmm. Same as quiet echo, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a quiet at the end. It's a see it, but see it, but delete it.
Which I think this is why
no operator for it.
Yeah, I think this is why Itai suggested this is similar to the quiet echo suggestion Itai had, but it was an option so that you didn't have you could still have a one argument form and a hold all sub value.
Right.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, you're not entirely wrong there. Oh boy. Okay. Yeah, I agree.
There's even the whole notion of logging levels, and I don't know if that would should even become echo levels, where it's it's always there, but it's only enabled when you want debugging level as opposed to error level or something like that.
That's more for quiet echo. The echoes are there, but they're quieted. I mean, that's something I do reasonably often. You have echoes in the code, but you do quiet echo.
Right, but the point is that you don't want to quiet all the echoes.
No, I got it. So you have tags in the echoes, and you say which ones you quiet.
Yeah.
I can see that being useful, but I mean, this is in the department of error handling, basically, of similar kinds of things, of some amount of code automation. All right, look, I think we've got some path forward here. I agree those are some ideas that we should consider, but let's I mean, having tags on echoes is a whole nother thing, which reminds me of tags on messages, right? It's like the verbosity level story, which unfortunately, as we've seen many times, one person's, I don't care about that message is another person's golden message. Am I making sense?
But I liked your idea about echo label, because that basically means that now the logging levels are echo levels are user defined instead of
what was the idea? Wait a minute, which idea?
Well, you mentioned echo label after I was talking about levels, and so the idea, and so I interpreted that as an idea of quiet echo taking an optional second argument where you give it the pattern that should be quieted. And then if your echoes are actually echo labels, then the pattern matches the label.
No, I see. I didn't think of that. But yes, that wasn't what I was thinking of, but it's a good idea. So you're suggesting quiet echo takes a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it's up to you to make a convention for how you quiet things you want to quiet.
Exactly.
It's not a crazy idea. What does quiet echo do right now in terms of that?
Just one argument.
It could take a pattern. And one day it could take a pattern. All right, so look, that's an interesting solution to that problem. We've still got the logging thing, which I think is probably for a separate discussion.
A subtle question. So it's for echo evaluation, each echo evaluation prints twice. So does that count as one or two echoes for things that take a number of echoes?
I think it's one echo. I think it's every echo call, not every call.
I was going to argue it should be, well, okay, it's a little complicated. I was going to argue for two, because when you set sort of your limit, what you're really trying to set is how much space it's going to take up on your screen.
Yes, but on the other hand, if you
slice one problem, right. If you tell it, I have, I can only have 5 echoes on my screen, then it's kind of unclear what to do.
Yeah, I think it has to be at one lump because otherwise you can't limit it. You can't limit in half, echo pairs.
I mean,
Right,
I
so
don't think it would be too tragic. I mean, it's
It
just
would
like
not
if
be
you have a
tragic,
log
but-
file and you're only looking at a window in it, it's fine that you're missing some pieces. But
well,
yeah.
okay, so then we have to have a visual indicator that we're missing something, a vertical ... or something like that. How would we do that? How would we do that? And what happens if you've got a print followed by echoes? Do the echoes just vanish? So your notebook, so if you have print, echo, 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 print, echo, 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 and then some of the earlier echoes expire.
Then they disappear, right? They think, right, you're deleting the
I
echoes
agree.
and prints live in their own place, right?
Yeah, okay, fine. So they just disappear in the notebook scrolls.
Yep.
Okay. And then you're claiming that the disappearance of echoes, it leaves no residue.
Correct.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. It's a little odd because, in the print world, in the message world, the final thing waves a flag and says, I'm done. Is there any grin of the Cheshire Cat that should be left, so to speak?
I mean, the first one, right? The first echo, or I guess the third echo, the last echo that prints could also say something like, hey, I'm not going to be printing anymore.
I mean, I think a difference between the two cases is that in the case of messages, you don't necessarily know where they're coming from. Whereas in the case of echoes, it's much more likely that you're in control of them and you know that you've done delete echo and that things may be pruned.
Right. It's very rare that I don't know where an echo is coming from. And if I'm in a situation where I'm confused, I use echo label or some such. So then I know exactly where each echo is coming from.
Well, that's because you're assuming echo is a local debugging loop, not something that somebody's put into a piece of production code.
Nobody should ever put echo into production code.
I was going to say, can I start putting echoes in production code?
Right. Okay, fine. So the other issue is that the message stuff deletes from the end, whereas the echo stuff deletes from the beginning. Right, the echo thing is a stack basically, or something. It's a stack, but it's something where it's a least recently used. It removes the things that haven't been recently used. Right, so what you'll see is that it will eat itself from the top.
So you're thinking delete echo with 5 specified will have 5 of the most recent things.
Yes, absolutely. That's the most useful thing for it to do. Anybody object to that?
No, I mean, right. And this is why, I mean, I guess we've moved away from this suggestion, right? But I did suggest an option of like running max or something where it lops off, where you see the 5 most recent or the 10 most recent ones.
I mean, we could have -5 be the tail and 5 be the head.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, that introduces another possible name of, tail echo or something.
The tail is gone. The animal left the building,
No, I mean, I'm talking about, in terms of like, Unix command line head and tail.
No, I understand that. I understand that. But my point is that at the end of it, wait a minute, tail, well, I guess you don't end tail. If the process exits, is there a tail left over?
Well, I mean, that's a meaningless question, right? Whatever the process wrote
you're
tails
right.
input stream, the last 5 things will be shown.
Okay,
And
so the animal did not leave the building, is what I'm saying. There's a piece of tail left over at the end.
correct.
Whereas the default case of delete echo, there is no tail left over.
Correct.
Everything is gone.
Yes.
Should quiet echo also be the same?
I mean, I'm wondering if these really want to be options rather than optional arguments, right? It's like keep, and we could have like 2 options, right? Keep from beginning and keep from end. So
it's really cruddy. I think we should use plus and minus for that because we've got so many conventions.
Right. So then what's the name of the option?
Why does it have to be an option? Why isn't it an argument?
Well, I guess my belief is that it's more common that you'd want the last 5 than you'd want the first 5, in which case it's weird.
Yeah,
it's weird if the default is to use negative values, but it's also weird if we reverse the sense of positive and negative.
Sure, we can't reverse the sense.
Also, I think delete echo of expr, one argument using 0 as the default is better.
Well, I think we all agree on that point. The question
Yeah,
is, how do you specify the non-zero?
-5, how would it then work? If it was -5, you couldn't do that.
What if? Okay, so delete echo, your option or argument or whatever, takes span syntax of what it's going to trim out.
What does 0 mean? What does it? Is it all? If it trims everything.
All is trims everything. Colon -5.
That's incredibly obscure.
I mean, semicolon -5 would mean
We
everything
understood.
up to. Yeah.
I guess, well, what is the notation of audio trim? If we wanted to use the trim name, we should at least make sure we know what the...
I think the original one was really image trim rather than audio trim. Audio
Why
trim.
is this taking forever to run?
Okay, so audio trim. Well, I guess I like audio trim as a better template because I think of it as linear, unlike image trim.
Yeah.
Right. So audio trim. I mean, right. If we called it right, and the default is to trim everything at the end. Yeah, I think audio trim with a second echo trim with a second argument actually makes a fair amount of sense.
Sorry, echo trim with what? Trim echo. Why is it?
Or trim. What's that?
Well, trim echo, what are you suggesting?
Right. I'm saying that trim echo with a second argument, makes sense.
What second argument?
Which is then right whether to keep anything from the beginning or end.
Well, so what is it from the end?
We would not have the hold all sub value in that case, right?
Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, that is right. If it's not an option, then we can't have the operator form.
The whole thing is if
it is an option, the operator form is still wonky because that's assuming you never want to echo blah arrow blah. You got to.
But we have plenty of precedent for things where where options, that the rules that are valid option names are treated especially.
I know. This is a slightly awkward case. Because I think echo is a somewhat general function. I think there are other cases where it's really undangerous.
You mean like string functions where you have string arguments? I don't buy that argument. We have plenty of plenty of cases. Right. Arguments options, right, has an option to control the behavior this way of whether.
Fair enough.
So it's common enough. We automated it.
Yeah. Okay. I have to run in a second here. Well, let me see.
Right. I'll confess that I'm a little bit confused about which function or functions we've decided to keep, or maybe we haven't decided yet.
No, we've decided we're keeping delete echo or some version of delete echo, trim echo, whatever.
Okay.
And that's the only one other than dollar echo
size limit.
Those
Okay.
are the only two we're keeping. And we know the functionality we want for delete echo. We just don't know quite how to achieve it. That is, we want keep the first 5, the last 5. I don't think we want. And the question of exactly how we subvalue, whatever it is still open. And we also need a separate discussion about logging.
Okay.
Okay. And that, I think, is it.
Okay.
We need to run.
Right.
So see you guys. Thanks.